Hi all, and welcome to the first video in our Sonata Form series where we're going to listen to and dissect a piece of music. Today we're going to be doing Franz Joseph Haydn Symphony number 97 in C major, and it will be the first movement of that. We're joined by, this is videos of my wife's fish tank, to entertain you while you're listening to me and listening to the music. So that's just going to be on in the background for you. So let's go over a quick overview of Sonata Form. Hopefully you've watched the previous videos, but if you haven't, here's a really quick recap, and I'll keep it up on the screen for a little bit. So Sonata Form is going to have an introduction. This one actually has a great introduction example, but the introduction is optional. You'll see in some later videos they don't have them. Then we have our exposition, where we have an A theme introduced, and then transition material to a B theme where we're in a different key, and then a codetta, and then that ends that exposition section, and then it's repeated. So this is where the main melodic ideas are presented. And then after we hear the exposition section again, we go into the development, where they take just fragments and chunks of the different melodic ideas from the exposition, and they mess around with it, change a bunch of keys a lot. You'll hear exactly what happens in here. A lot of diminished chords, a lot of moving around keys. It's usually pretty strenuous musically. So you'll hear that, and then after that development section, we have the recapitulation, where we hear the A and the B again. Usually the B is in a different key, maybe it's orchestrated differently. And then we have a coda, which wraps up our piece. It might introduce some new material, it might use the old material again. So into a little bit of the history of this form. It was developed in the early 1700s, the early classical era, and it was used by classical composers all throughout that era and beyond, which we'll talk about more. But the main guys in the classical era would be Haydn, Mozart, who we'll hear a video from, and Beethoven, who we might hear a couple videos from. And these guys were obsessed with form and structure. We can speculate as to why. Here's my thoughts behind it, is that Haydn worked for this family called the Esterhazy family. They were nobility, and he was hired to basically create music for their entertainment, for parties they were throwing, or for any other event they needed music for. Because remember, there's no recorded music, so if they wanted entertainment, they had to have live musicians play it, and they would want to hear new stuff, so they would, commission Haydn to write this music for them. And he wrote 107 symphonies, and he wrote a ton of other music. But how is he able to create 107 symphonies? You think you'd run out of, ideas for that. Well, he would use sonata form. So the first movement of a symphony is always in sonata form, and there's other movements that can be in sonata form. Sometimes the middle movements are usually dance movements for a party where they would dance. There's variations on this, of course, but he basically had this, it's not quite plug and play, but he had this general framework with which to create a piece of music. So he didn't have to be super creative in terms of structure, because he would just, he would, let's say, write an intro, and then maybe he would have an A theme and a B theme, and he'd be like, okay, well, I'm going to play the A, and then I'll come up with some transition stuff, and then I'll go to B, and then we'll repeat that, and then I'll play with it in the development and recap it, and maybe add some new stuff in the coda. So he was working with this framework, and that's how he was able to create so many works using this. And it's just a super important, super popular form after this. Haydn is the master of the early sonata form. So let's get into analyzing a little bit of this music. This piece is entitled Symphony number 97 in C major, Movement 1, Adagio Vivace. So those are tempo markings. It's named after the tempo markings. So Adagio, it's going to start with a slow intro, and then when it hits the Vivace, quick and lively, we're going to hear that's when the exposition starts. So let's get into it. So this is the intro. Make sure you're really listening for these themes, because they'll show up. remember these intros are optional. Not all of them start with an intro. Sometimes they go straight into the exposition. All right, here comes A. Okay, so that's the A theme, and here comes the transition. So you can hear we're changing key. And since it's in a major key, C major, we're going to modulate to the 5, G major. Here's B. So you can hear how this is a contrasting theme. It's in a different key, different melody, different rhythms. And here's the codetta, and you can hear that it is the same material from the intro. Here's the codetta part. Bringing it to a close, and then we repeat back to A, starting the exposition over. And we've heard all this before, because it's a direct repeat. Transitioning again to the B section. Changing keys, going to the key of the 5, the dominant, which is C major. Since the 5th note of C is G, we're going to the key of G major. These are closely related keys. They're only different by one sharp or flat. In this case, we add a sharp. Here's B, the contrasting theme. Now remember, in the recap, this is going to come back differently. Maybe in a different key, maybe with different material around it. A little bit of intro material. Takes us into our codetta. So this is after the repeat of the exposition, so here comes the development section. We immediately hear the A theme in a different key. And we hear that A theme moving all around now. You're gonna hear that bum-ba-dum, which is from the A theme. This is taking a bit of the transition material and a bit of the A material, moving it around different keys. this is the recap. Pretty short development section. So this is the A theme again. And now we're going to get into the transition. It's going to be a little different because we're going to a different key. So you can hear how this transition is different from the previous transition in the exposition, but also similar. Now we're going to arrive at B, and it's going to be different than it was before. Very similar orchestration, but different key. A little bit of intro material again. And this is going to transition us into our coda. Big restatement of A to lead us into the finale of the coda. And you can really hear how it ends on big dominant to tonic, 5-1. Like they pretty much all end in this era. So that's a pretty prototypical classical era sonata form example from Haydn Symphony number 97.